Hi guys, Steeler Boy here. Welcome to the fourth in the series of FSX videos that I'm doing. This one is our first flight. So far we've been, in the first three videos, we've been looking at setting things up, installing the program, installing things like FSUI PC and EasyDock camera, etc., setting up the controls. This flight we're actually going to take a look at the aircraft, take a look at the gauges, etc., the basic things to know, and do our first flight. And we're actually going to do a circuit of Wickenby airfield. Wickenby airfield is in Lincolnshire in the UK. It's a nice quiet airfield. I didn't want to put the aircraft somewhere like Gatwick or Heathrow or somewhere mad like that where we're going to get lots of traffic coming and going, and we won't be able to do a circuit there. So I've chosen a nice quiet airfield, Wickenby. We're just going to be doing a circuit which is basically a rectangular route, if you like, around the airfield. I'll show you more about that later. I just want to get you guys, for those of you who have not flown before or are quite new to FSX and are probably struggling with takeoffs and landings, I'm just going to put you in and we'll take it slow and just do a climb out and then a landing, just to get used to things. I do advise, one thing I often see and hear is, and probably it's human nature to do so, but when people get flight sim, they jump straight into a jet and think they can fly it. That's not going to happen. Really, it's not the way to do things. Start things very slow. Start it nice and simple in something like this aircraft you can see before you, the default Cessna 172. It's a nice aircraft. It handles well, nice and slow. You have time to think about your actions and what you're doing. Learn to fly, learn to control an aircraft such as this, and then once you've got this one nailed, then progress perhaps to a twin prop aircraft, a twin engined aircraft, and then go on to jets. That's what I did. I've been in FSX or flight sims for many years now, and you know, like everybody else, I struggled to begin with. It was a long, hard process to learn how to take off and land correctly. I'm not a real pilot. I have to stress that. I want to put that out right now. I am not a real pilot. I'm not an instructor. I've never actually flown an aircraft in real life, but I am an enthusiast. I am a flight sim enthusiast, and I just want to get you guys up to this, the same level to be able to take off and land. And it's a nice feeling when you can control an aircraft and get it doing what you want. It's a nice, satisfying feeling. So without further ado, let's hop into the cockpit. Now, you will have seen these on the previous videos, and no doubt you're all familiar with an aircraft cockpit anyway. But what I'm going to do to begin with, I'm going to take you on a tour of the six-pack. And this is not something that you find on an abdomen or a can of beers on a supermarket shelf. The six-pack is the big six. It's these six dials here. 1, 2, 3 on the top, 1, 2, 3 on the bottom. That is the six-pack. Right, what are they? Okay, going from the top left. The top one is your airspeed indicator. Now you'll notice that it starts at 40 and goes right round to 200. In an aircraft such as this, you're not going to reach 200, and I'll tell you why. It's in knots, by the way. It's not miles per hour, it's in knots. Aircraft use a speed of knots. The green arc here from 40 up to 120, the green arc is your safe operating arc. That is your safe operating speeds. The yellow arc is cautionary, so you can go into the yellow arc if you wish for a short while. It's not advisable, but you can do it. The red line you must never ever reach. Do not red line, because that will put stress on the aircraft. You're going to fall out the sky basically. So the red line means danger. Red, as always, means danger. Yellow is an amber warning. For safety, for general operations, stay within the green arc and all is good. The white arc here on the outside that you can see, that is your flaps operating speed, your safe flaps operating speed. So as you're descending, as you're coming into land, once your speed drops below, what's that, about 80 knots, let's say, there's your white arc, then you can start extending the flaps. So we'll do that. We'll look at that a bit later on as we come into land here. Okay, the middle dial, the top middle, that is your attitude indicator, or artificial horizon as it's sometimes known. Because the aircraft at the moment is powered off, you'll see that it's not in action, but once we put the power on, this sloping attitude indicator here that you can see, that will actually come level with the aircraft's wings. This marker in the middle, these orange markers, that is your aircraft. Left wing, right wing, and then your nose in the middle. That's representing your aircraft, and this horizon will basically, or should, under straight and level conditions, that will line up with your aircraft. On the top right we have the altimeter, or altimeter, depending on which side of the pond you're from. Now Wickenby is actually 88 feet or 82 feet I think it is above mean sea level. Therefore it's not reading zero. A lot of people new to aircraft are quite surprised, you know, when they think that it should be zero when you're on the ground. That's not the case. It goes on above mean sea level basically. So here at Wickenby we're just under 100 feet above mean sea level. That's important when you're coming into land. It's important to know the elevation of an airfield, the elevation of the height above mean sea level. Very important to know that as you're coming into land. For example, at somewhere like Leeds Bradford in the UK, it's actually about 700 feet above sea level. So when you're coming into land, if you were on the ground, your marker here, the altimeter, would indicate that you're actually 700 feet, even though you're on the ground. So that's very, very important to know how high you are above the actual ground. So, for example, on this airfield, Wickenby, when we are at, let's say, 400 feet, when the gauge is indicating 400 feet, we're actually 300 feet above the runway, not 400. So, very important. Okay, down to the bottom left, and we have the turn and bank indicator, which basically tells you whether you're turning or banking left or right. And you've got markers, there's one either side, one above the L and one above the R. That is your standard rate turn marker. So when you are banking, if you turn just enough to line the wingtip in line with the markers, you'll be turning at standard rate. That is the standard rate turn, the recommended turn. This little black button here in the middle, that's for use if you're using rudders. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm actually going to be using auto rudder, and I'll explain why in a second. But normally when I'm flying, I'll be using rudders that are not auto rudder. In other words, I can operate my rudders independently of my yoke. I can independently of the ailerons. But for this purpose, it's going to be auto rudder. So what will happen is, as I start to bank the aircraft, the black marker here in the middle, the black button, will stay in the center. If not, if I was banking, if I just view down a little bit so you can see the yoke, if I was to turn to the left but not use my rudder, then this black little button here would slip. It would slip to one way or the other because your aircraft is not coordinated. The idea is that that black marker here has to stay in the middle at all times for the aircraft to be coordinated and in sync. Okay, the middle one, the middle bottom, that is your heading indicator. Now this is extremely important. That's your compass, if you like. That tells you which direction you're basically flying. So at the moment, as you can see, we're actually pointing, or our nose is pointing at 82 degrees. We are actually going to be taking off on runway 21, which is behind us, just over here. Now that's 21. Now runways, basically you add a 0 on the end to find out their degrees. They are actually aligned. They're not just numbered randomly like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are numbered in line with the direction that they're facing. So 21 is actually about 210 degrees. That is our takeoff direction. For example, at runway 9, if there was a runway 9, that would be 90 degrees. So that's how runways are numbered. So we are going to be taking off on about runway 21, which is this one here. There is actually a heading bug. And a bug is not something that's wrong, it's actually a marker. So you can control this orange marker here that's going along the outside of the indicator. Because we're taking off on runway 21, I'd actually already aligned the bug with the runway, about 210 degrees. And I'll explain why when we actually get lined up and as we start to take off. The final gauge of the big six is your vertical speed indicator. Again, very, very important. This tells you whether you're climbing or descending and at what rate. The increments are in 100 feet per minute. So the first indicator here is 5, that's 500 feet per minute going up. Then you've got 1,000 feet per minute, and if you were really climbing like a rocket, you've got 1,500 feet per minute. Similarly, coming down, descending, you're going down at 500 feet per minute, and then descending at 1,000 feet per minute. And if you're on a death dive into the ground, 1,500 feet per minute. Usually on landing, it's best to try and get it as close as possible to the zero marker. 100, 200, 300 maybe, if you can. Yes, it's a simulator, and yes, you can land heavily if you want to, you know, because you can. You're not going to do any physical damage to anything. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to get things as realistic as possible, aim for getting a very, very low vertical speed when you're landing. Yeah, be gentle to your aircraft, treat it well, and it will treat you well. So I normally like to aim either 0, 100 or 200. That's what I like to aim for myself. That's the big six covered. We'll just take a look at a couple of other dials. On the far left here, you've got your fuel gauge. That's very important. I do have fuel in the aircraft at the moment, so I'm not concerned about that. You'll see right now it's actually reading 0. Again, that's because the aircraft is not powered up, so none of these gauges are actually working. The other ones we're not really too concerned with. You've got your exhaust gas temperature, your fuel flow, vacuum gauge or suction gauge, and temperatures, etc. Again, as a general rule of thumb, keep everything in the green line or the green arc, and everything is good. One more dial, and then we'll get cracking at looking at some of the lights and stuff below. This one here, bottom right, this is your revs per minute, your tachometer. 1,000 RPM is your normal idle speed in an aircraft such as this. And then if you were doing a run-up, or if you were doing your checklist before takeoff, you'd probably increase your revs to about 2,000 RPM and check that your magnetos are affecting the RPM accordingly, etc. Again, you've got a green line there. Let me just move the yoke a little bit so you can see. Green line RPM and then a red marker. Don't try and go above the red marker. Stick within green and all is good. Okay, so let's go down and let's take a look at the lights, and also what I want to talk about is something called trim. Now, trim, how can I explain this? Basically, what it is, as you pull back on the yoke, if you wanted to maintain a steady rate of climb, that's obviously going to put pressure on your arms and your hands. You don't want to be pulling back on the yoke permanently. You want to be able to release the yoke, and basically you should be able to operate hands-free. If your aircraft is flying straight and level, you shouldn't need any pressure or any turns on the yoke. You should be able to fly hands-free. So what the trim does, it actually enables you to physically maintain the pressure as if you were pulling back on the yoke, or pushing forward in some cases. You do have a default takeoff position. That's where it's set for takeoff. As you then climb and pull back on the yoke, you then trim up, what they call trim up. And what that will do is, as you trim up, as you increase the trim, you can then relax the pressure on your yoke. And you'll get to a point where you will actually take your hands off the yoke, that'll be hands free, and yet you'll be trimmed correctly that your aircraft will still be climbing at the required rate without any need to pull back from you. Similarly for descending, well, not really descending, but the thing about aircraft is as you increase speed, when you reach your cruising level and you increase speed, the aircraft will want to climb. The faster it goes, it will want to climb. So what you'll find you'll need to do is to stop it climbing. You can either pull back on the throttle, or if you want to maintain the same speed, if you want to be as fast as possible, let's say, you will need to trim down. That will basically simulate pushing forward on the yoke. You'll trim down and you'll not climb anymore. You will stop climbing. So that is what trim is used for. It's very important, and it actually makes life a lot easier when you're flying. You can control the aircraft exactly how you want it, and I'll show you how we use the trim as we do the circuit around this airfield. Okay, now just before we actually go ahead and start up the aircraft and start the flight, I just want to explain the controller that I'm using today. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll probably know that I do have actually quite a full flight setup. I've got the Cytec yoke and pedals and the Cytec throttle quadrants, etc. However, today, because I know that those kind of things, and I appreciate, are quite sort of luxury items for many people, they're not lucky enough to have that kind of hardware. A lot of people will probably fly by keyboard, but equally, probably a lot of people will use something like the Xbox controller. And that's what I'm going to be flying with today. And now this is how I've actually set mine up. I thought you'd be interested in seeing how exactly I've got mine set up. So going from the top down, the left hand shoulder trigger button, that's the elevator trim down. Going over to the right hand side, the right hand shoulder button is the elevator trim up. Then the select button is actually the parking brake. And over on the right hand side, the four keys here, the Y key is throttle increase. The B key is mixture increase. The X key here, well, they're actually PlayStation symbols here, but on mine it's the X key. That's mixture decrease. And the A key is throttle decrease. So as you can see, these two vertical ones form the throttle increase decrease, and the two horizontal ones mixture increase and mixture decrease. Going over to the left hand side, the left hand thumb wheel or thumb control, thumb stick, that controls ailerons left and right, and then up and down is the elevator. The hat switch here, that controls your look around. You can look out the window, pan left, right, up and down. And then finally the right hand thumbstick, I haven't actually assigned anything to it apart from clicking it, actually a physical click on it rather than moving it left and right and up and down. That is my brakes. So that is how I've got my controller configured. If you want, obviously you can configure yours exactly how you wish, but I would strongly advise that you go for the same kind of functions. You do want to assign buttons to elevator, trim and up and down. You do want to assign brakes somewhere. You do want to assign throttles, mixtures and your ailerons and elevator. How you assign those is entirely up to you, but this is how I've got mine set up. Okay, let's go and start this baby up. First thing to check is that your parking brake is set, which is good, it is. Then we need to run through the lights and the startup procedure here. So first thing to do is to put on your master switch, your battery switch and your alternator, switch those on. Then you put your fuel pump on. You can hear it kick into life there. Then you want to put your beacon light on first. Now the beacon light you should always put on before you start your engine. Yeah, it's the rotating red light that you can see on an aircraft. That is important to switch on because it lets people around you know that you're about to start your engine, or that your engine is on, obviously in some cases. Next thing you put on your navigation light, that's your red and green wingtip navigation lights. That's all you need to switch on likewise for the moment. You need to make sure your mixture is set to full, so we'll push the mixture all the way in. Your throttle, just crank that open a little bit. Now you can start the engine. So we'll put the magnetos all the way over to the right hand side, and the engine fires up, all good. Let's take a look at the RPM, because the idle speed roughly should be about 1000 RPM. It is almost, so I'll just back off the throttle just a fraction. That'll do. Okay, before we start moving, we need to put on the taxi lights, and then we'll push back. So we'll release the parking brake and we'll start pushing back, which is Shift P, by the way, if you didn't know. Shift and P starts to push back, and also Shift and P cancels the pushback. So we'll press that again when we're ready to stop the pushback. Okay, that'll do. Go back into cockpit. Right, increase the throttle just a little bit. And then turn the aircraft around to the left. You'll notice that the yoke moves to the left because I'm not using rudders. As I've already explained, it's auto rudder, which means that you can move the ailerons, you can move your yoke to actually control the rudder. The rudder is auto rudder. That will turn with the yoke. I don't know if you can see that actually in the aircraft. No, you can't. I thought the pedals may move, but they don't. Okay, just while the aircraft is started, let's have a look how the gauges have now sprung into life. So you can see the attitude indicator, the artificial horizon, that's now level. The fuel, that's now showing full. Obviously your fuel flow and everything, that's all sprung into life as well. I'll also switch on the avionics master, if I can go down to the switches again. I'll put all the radios in operation as well. While I'm down at the switches, I will also put on the strobe light and the landing light. The thing about the landing lights and the strobe lights, there's a rule that you need to know around those. The landing lights, you turn on, the landing light and the strobe, you should only turn on when you're entering the runway. You can then, when you reach an altitude of 10,000 feet, you can then turn off the landing lights if you wish. And on landing, again, wait until you clear the runway, then you can turn off your strobe light and your landing light. The strobe must remain on all the time after entering the runway throughout the flight, and then when you land, turn it off when you leave the runway. So because we're now entering the runway, we'll switch on the strobe light and switch on the landing light. We can now turn off the taxi lights. There we go, that's all set. We can turn the fuel pump off as well. We're all set to go. Right, let's do this. Increase the throttle slightly. Get the aircraft rolling. Quick look around to make sure there's nothing coming. And there isn't. That's all good. Just getting lined up on the runway. Now I'm actually using my brake. To get a tighter circle, what you can do is dab the brake, and that will actually put you in a tighter turning circle. That'll do. We're all lined up. Okay, so what is a traffic pattern? What is a circuit? Basically, it's a rectangular route around the airfield at 90-degree turns. So we're on now the departure leg, the climb out if you like. That forms one leg or one side of the rectangle. And as you can see from our heading indicator, we're lined up. The runway is 210 degrees. That is where I've put my heading bug. Now the reason being, I've set my heading bug there because that gives you a reference, that provides a reference as to what direction the runway lies in. Yeah, so I've lined it up with the runway there. The next turn that we do is once we've climbed out to a height of around 500 feet or so, we'll do a left turn onto a heading of 120. That's our 90-degree turn. We then do another left-hand 90-degree turn onto what's called the downwind leg. That'll be, what, 207 is that? Looks like. No, that can't be right. 30 degrees. 120, then down to 30 degrees. That's our downwind leg. Then we'll do another left-hand turn onto base leg, which is 300 degrees. And then finally, our turn onto final to bring us back onto the runway. So let's do this, and I'll show you how it works. Again, a quick check to make sure your trim is at takeoff position. We're all good. The mixture is at full. We're not going to be using flaps for takeoff. We'll use those for landing. All of our lights are set correctly. We are all good to go. So let's increase the throttle, maximum throttle. And we're rolling. Keep it nice and straight down the centre line if you can. Minute adjustments. And when we get to about 60 knots, which is now, we'll pull back very slowly. Oh, nice. There we go. Now, ideally, the rate of climb in a Cessna like this wants to be around 80 knots. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to trim up to maintain around 80 knots. Right, there we go. I'm now not pulling back on the yoke. I've used my trim all the way. I'm just going to trim down a fraction. Small clicks on the trim. So that we try and maintain 80 knots. We're a little bit below 80 knots, but nothing too serious. We're okay. A quick look out the window. There we go. That's Lincolnshire in all its glory. There we go. Okay, what we'll do is we'll start a left turn now. We're high enough. So I'm going to start a climbing left-hand turn onto 120. Now if you remember the bank, look at the attitude, or rather the turn coordinator, sorry. That is your turn. I'm trying to fly one-handed here, which is why I'm struggling a bit. I'm moving the mouse to show you. That left-hand indicator there, that's where we want to be. Again, very, very minute adjustments of the controller. It is quite sensitive. You might have to turn the sensitivity down a little bit. So there we go. We're on to now the crosswind leg of 120. We're still climbing. I'm actually going to lower the throttle a little bit. Bring the throttle out just a touch. We're going to climb to an altitude of 2,000 feet. Oh, I'm not quite sure what's happening there. A bit of a glitch. I apologise about that. We're struggling a little bit. Don't know what's happening to my machine, but all's good. We're all good. And we should see, if we look to the left, there is our runway. So I'm going to start another turn now. I'm going to level off, decrease the throttle, lower the throttle, and then bank round to the left. Onto a heading of 30 degrees, 30. So you can see now that the runway bug that we set, that orange marker on the compass, that's now immediately behind us. We now know that we're flying in line with the runway. We're flying up the runway, if you like, flying in the opposite direction to the runway. Now I just need to back off the throttle a little bit more and trim down a fraction. Now if we look over to the left, we're flying directly in line with the runway. Going to back off the throttle a little more to start a descent, a steady descent. Trying to keep around the 80 knots mark if possible, looking at the speed, and using the trim. So it's a combination of throttle, trim and speed. You want to be kind of adjusting or looking at all three. Now let's have a look across to the left hand side. You want to continue flying. What we're on now, what's called a downwind leg. That's the leg we're on. We're flying downwind on the runway. We've actually just drifted a little off course. Let me come back on course a little bit. So you want to continue flying on this leg until the airfield is around 45 degrees behind you. So we'll keep flying for a little longer yet. I'm just going to trim up and maintain this kind of altitude for the moment. Now you'll notice that I keep mentioning the word trim. That's because I'm not actually using the yoke a great deal. I'm actually using the trim of the aircraft. Just little taps on the trim control just to bring it up and keep it exactly where I want it. If your speed starts dropping like it is now, it's dropping to around 70 knots, then you can increase the speed a little, the throttle rather. Increase your throttle, the aircraft will then start to climb as well, but it will also increase in speed. Right, I think we're good. We can now start our left-hand turn onto base. So I'm going to lower the throttle again because we actually need to be descending now. About 500 feet per minute, roughly. A steady turn. I am using the yoke a little bit on my turn. Remembering that as you turn, your nose will dip. The aircraft will want to descend when you turn. So it's always important to put a little bit of back pressure on the yoke when you're turning. Okay, I'm going to level out there, about 300 degrees. And we're going to start descending. Now I'm going to put one notch of flaps in. If I go down to the flaps, which are over here, I'm going to put one notch of flaps in. Okay, the aircraft's nose will automatically pitch up. As soon as you put the flaps down, the aircraft will want to pitch up, so just remember that. Looking at the runway, we're okay yet. We'll keep flying on this heading for a short time. So I'm using my trim control now just to try and maintain about 500 feet per minute. We'll shortly begin our left-hand turn onto finals. So we're at about 1,000 feet above the airport now. Remembering that the airfield is 100 feet above mean sea level. Let's start our left-hand turn onto finals. Okay, I turned a little bit too soon, but not a problem. Not a problem. And again, this is quite jerky because I am using an Xbox controller. It's quite strange to use an Xbox controller. Slight increase in throttle because the speed was starting to drop a little. And we try and line up now with the runway. Okay, so try and maintain, when you've got flaps out in the 172, I normally go for about 70 to 60 knots for a landing speed. So now it's just a matter of fine-tuning your direction. Keep your wings straight and level if you can. Use the trim to trim up, to make minute adjustments in your attitude. Coming into land now. A little bit high I think, but we're okay. Back off the throttle. And then you want to aim for a nice smooth landing if you can. There we go, and then brake. So there we go, that's a circuit of Wickenby Airfield. Let's just take a look at that landing again. Nice thing about the flight sim, you can actually replay that. So let's just go to options and instant replay of around 60 seconds, that should do. Now what I want you to do is to watch the gauges here. I think I landed a little bit heavily. I probably landed about 300 feet or so, I don't know. 300 feet per minute. But let's just watch the gauges as we come into land, especially this one, the vertical speed indicator. Let's see what kind of touchdown I actually got. So 400, about 100, 200. I didn't think that was too bad. I actually thought I'd landed heavier than I did. Let's take a look from an external view. And this is something that you can do when you're actually doing the flights. You want to be replaying the final few moments, looking at your indicators, looking at the speed, looking at your vertical speed indicator, etc. Making sure your wings are level. Analyze your landings. Let's just go for an external view. Now, something you want to be sure of is that your back wheels always touch down first. Yeah, never touch down on your nose wheel, that is bad. Always touch down on your back wheels first and then the nose wheel. So here we go, we're landing. Back wheels first, then the nose wheel. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, let's just hop back in the cockpit and unpause the sim. So I hope that explains a very brief takeoff and landing. It is difficult, I know. It's difficult to tie everything together. The key thing, let me just actually, what we'll do is we'll taxi back. Because there are a couple of things that I need to mention when you're actually coming off the runway and shutting things down. So we'll just taxi on back. We'll have to come off the runway here, just do a bit of grass tracking. One of the beauties of a simulator, you can do that. But of course it is a Cessna, so there's no problem about going to grass anyway. Okay, we'll head back to the parking position where we were earlier. This is obviously a small airfield, so there are no real turn-off points as such. You have to taxi back along the runway you just came. Many of the larger airports, of course, or all of the larger airports will have turn-off points and taxiways, etc. But this little airfield does not have such luxuries. Okay, so we're off the runway now. So what you would normally do at this point is you would announce to air traffic control that you're actually clear of the runway, or the tower. Announce to the tower that you're clear of the runway. What you need to do then is you need to turn off your landing lights and your strobe lights. You need to then turn on your taxi lights. If you wish, you can also clean up the aircraft by retracting the flaps. And also you can adjust your trim if you want to do, get that back in a takeoff position. And then you need to park up. That'll do us. Safely parked up. So that's it. You can then shut down. First thing to do, of course, put your parking brake on, like so. You can then shut down your aircraft, or you can turn the taxi lights off for one thing. You can also turn the avionics master off at this point. You can then pull your mixture all the way out, which will shut down the engine, like so. Pull the throttle all the way back out, turn off the navigation lights, turn off your beacon light because now the engine is stopped. Turn off your battery switches, and then your magnetos, turn those off as well. And that's it. The aircraft is now shut down. You're clear to open the door if you wish. And we'll get out and enjoy the Wickenby, the Lincolnshire countryside. Okay guys, well I hope that's helped. It's very difficult. As I say, I'm not a pilot. I'm not a real pilot. I'm not an instructor. I've never flown an aircraft. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult for me to try and commentate on all the things at the same time. The advice that I can give is take things slow. That's the number one thing to do. Take it slowly. Make sure everything is set up correctly. Get your controller, your hardware controller, get that set up correctly so that you've got your trim controls set up. You've got your ailerons set up and your elevators. The key things to remember whilst flying: speed. Always keep a check on your speed. Keep a check on your artificial horizon. Make sure the aircraft is flying straight and level. Keep a check of your vertical speed indicator, whether you're descending or climbing. And of course your actual altimeter. Get to the level you want, get to the height you want, and then level off. If you want to stop climbing or to level off, reduce your throttle. Try not to, as a general rule of thumb, try not to descend by pushing forward on the yoke. Because what will happen is, yes, although you will descend, you will stop climbing, you will also start to pick up speed. Quite a lot in some cases. So if you can, as you approach the height that you want, just back off the throttle. If you're climbing at like 500 feet per minute, back off the throttle. Yeah, reduce the throttle. That will start to reduce the speed that you're flying through the air, and therefore it will slowly bring your rate of climb down. You will stop climbing. And then, of course, the all-important thing, trim. Use the trim. I cannot stress enough how important the trim control is. Once you get used to using trim, it'll become second nature to you. You'll start to trim up and trim down. So have a play around with that. It's unfortunate that as I'm flying in this view, you can't actually see the trim control. Well, you kind of, if I was to pan down, you probably could. But it's a bit unfortunate that you can't see the trim control working. I'm telling you I'm trimming, but you can't see it working. So all I can say is have a go with that yourself. It's something you can try yourself. Hope you found that useful. Please leave comments in the comment box below. And if you've enjoyed what you see, then please leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to doing my next video for you. Until then, take care, and I'll catch you next time. Bye bye.